Good evening and welcome to Education World's Facebook Live discussion on the Interim Union Budget 22-24-25 and education, hits and misses. Let me begin by introducing our panelists. My first panelist is Dr. C. Rajkumar. He's a polymath alumnus of Madras, Delhi, Oxford, and Harvard universities. He's the founding vice chancellor of the OP Jindal Global University, Sonipat, which is ranked India's #1 private liberal arts and humanities university in the EducationWorld India Higher Education rankings. Welcome, Dr. Rajkumar.
Thank you, Summiya.
My next panelist is Dr. Venita Kaul. Dr. Kaul is Professor Emerita, School of Education Studies, Ambedkar University, Delhi. She was the former founder director of the Center for Early Childhood Education and Development and has also served as a senior education specialist at the World Bank and also served on several government education committees. She's the leading authority on early childhood education in India. Dr. Kaul, a warm welcome to you. Praveen Raju is co-chairman of FICCI Arise, which is the Alliance for Reimagining School Education, and also founder-director of the CBSE and Cambridge-affiliated Suchitra Academy in Hyderabad. Dr. Geeta Bhatt is director of the Non-Collegiate Women's Education Board, University of Delhi, and a well-known political commentator. Welcome, Dr. Bhatt.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Dr. Protiva Kundu is the research lead and thematic lead of social sectors at the Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, which is one of India's leading think tanks. She's a trained economist and her work focuses on financing of education, gender and child responsive budgeting, education equity and child protection. Welcome, Protiva.
Thank you, Summiya.
My next panelist is Dr. Avantika Tomar, who's the partner at EY Parthenon. Avantika managed the growth agenda for the education practice, delivering client engagements in India and the Middle East, focusing on K-12 and higher education, EdTech, and public policy. She also is guest faculty at prestigious B schools such as IIM Calcutta and MDI Gurgaon. Welcome, Dr. Tomar.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for having me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our debate and before I begin shooting the questions, a short context to our debate. So this morning at 11 o'clock, Nirmala Sitharaman, the Union Finance Minister, delivered the interim Union Budget 2024-25, the last budget of the Modi government before the next general election. In her shortest budget speech, the minister said that the past decade has been a decade of transformative growth and said the interim budget will focus on fiscal consolidation, infrastructure, agriculture, green growth, and also youth and women empowerment. For instance, the infrastructure spending has been increased by almost 11% to 11.11 lakh crore. A day earlier, the finance ministry had signaled that India's economy will grow by almost 7% this year. So driving and sustaining this economic growth will require unprecedented investment in human capital development. But the signals from the interim budget that this will happen are not good. I was earlier speaking with our panelists and saying that the word education has not been mentioned at all. In her speech, Sitharaman says, though, that the NEP 2020 is ushering transformational reforms. And she also commends the Skill India mission for training 1.4 crore youth and reskilling 55 lakh youth. And female enrollment in higher education has gone up by 28% in the past 10 years. Apart from the government planning to set up more medical colleges, the one highlight is the corpus of 1 lakh crore for India's tech-savvy youth to encourage the private sector to scale up research and innovation significantly in sunrise domains. I dug into the budget documents and I found that the 2024 estimates for education, including notes on demands for grants, is 1.2 lakh crore. Last year we got 1.12 lakh crore. So that's just an increase of 8,000 crore, which barely covers, according to me, inflation. So if this estimate is going to be retained in the post-election full budget, it's overall disappointing and business as usual budget for education, far from the 6% GDP target. So let me begin with you, Professor Rajkumar. and ask you what is your reaction to the interim budget, and should it have at least focused or said more on, especially skill development and higher education, given that the NEP 2020 has promised, transformational reforms in all sectors, especially higher education.
Well, thank you so much, Summiya, and thank you to Education World for actually putting together this panel at this time. First of all, let me say that it's not entirely accurate to call this as an interim budget. What has happened really is a vote on account, which empowers the government to ensure that the spendings and essentially the government's expenditure that was planned during this time is able to be taken care of for the next few months. So it's not fair to make an argument about what the government has done in this exercise, because much of what it is planning to do is clearly left for the new government that will come into power post-July. In some ways, I think the government has taken a very cautious and I would even argue an ethically sensible route, which is that it recognizes its role, a unique situation where the elections are coming in the next few months, and it has left for the next government to essentially develop the roadmap for the future. Having said that, it is also true that during the finance minister's speech, we heard about some of the important milestones that has been reached during the last year, especially with regard to increase in enrollment of women in STEM courses, and also establishment of new academic institutions across the STEM areas, including IITs, IIMs, and other institutions, as well as universities. I am quite sanguine about the fact that the vision of the government with a view to implementing the national education policy is intact. A lot of other measures are being taken and have been taken since the announcement of the national education policy towards fulfilling the vision of NEP. So I think it's important for us to recognize that, as the finance minister said, there are no spectacular announcements, and she was quite candid about it. And that's exactly what it should be, for both the reasons that this is a vote on account, which will ensure the government is able to essentially take out money to spend for the expenditure that's going to be incurred for the next few months, and give room for the next government to articulate essentially the budget, what will be presented hopefully in the month of July.
Yeah, but I mean, though you've given quite a reasoned argument, I think that, some sectors like, say, infrastructure, defense, and all that, they have got quite a lot of, detailed mention, and they've got 10 and 20% increases. Why hasn't that happened to social sector? When the economy is growing at 7% and you want to sustain this economic growth, you need soft infrastructure too, which is human capital.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you. I think that the way I look at it is that two things have happened. One, not only the national education policy has articulated a roadmap and a plan of action for what the future ought to be. So clearly, the government ought to ensure that the money that has been promised in the NEP is given for education. And I want to confine to education and not other social sectors. I also want to highlight that the Honorable Prime Minister of India had announced a very important vision with regard to Viksit Bharat 2047. The Viksit Bharat 2047, he essentially talks about how it is supposed to galvanize social consciousness and focus on youth, and how the youth of India, especially the ones who are in colleges, universities, and are embracing higher education, they are going to be laying the foundations for the 2047 vision. I do believe that the Viksit Bharat 2047 vision and the national education policies plan of action can only be fulfilled if we are able to achieve the 6% plan with regard to GDP investment. I would like to give the benefit of doubt to the government, especially when all we see is a vote on account and not in any way a plan for the next budget. I do believe that there are other institutional reforms that are beyond what the budget announcement will make is being seen, including reform of the regulatory processes, online education, empowering institutions, including the policy surrounding institution of eminence. So many other things are happening around the framework of NEP, and that I believe should give us some solace as to what the thinking of the government is.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you and ask you then, what is your 3 wish list for the full budget for education?
Sure.
Dr. Bhatt, I'd like to come to you now and ask you to make your introductory comments on the budget and restricting to education. Do you think that there was anything in it at all for education, and do you think we should be hopeful?
Well, taking forward to what Professor Rajkumar just mentioned, considering that it is an interim budget and, the government is per se here for, now we can actually count in number of days before the general elections take place. So it was expected that it was very much expected that there won't be something out of the blue which is going to come out in this budget. And considering, if we talk about education for the last, I think for the last 3 financial years, it has been about nearly 3% of the GDP, the spend on education. And though, as you just mentioned, that there is about an 8% increase in the budget that has been allocated to education. You see, we also need to understand that this year we do not have a economic survey report that is out. So we will have to kind of, look at it in terms of the earlier economic survey which came last year. And if you try to compare it with the previous economic survey reports, we do see that there is a constant increase in terms of, if we look at infrastructural parameters, because that is what we again and again, we have been talking, especially in terms of school education, though, I am from higher education. But school education, there has been a lot of emphasis in the national education policy. And we all are, we are very hopeful that the foundations that are being laid for implementation of national education policy is something for which the government is going to, spend in the coming years. And for that purpose, I think, because whenever you talk about the, the social structure development, you are talking about education, you are talking about health. And in those terms, if we see, we do see that, in the last couple of years, there have been the number of medical colleges, they have increased. There has been almost 60% increase in the number of seats, medical seats. A number of medical colleges have increased by almost, I think, 250 or so new medical colleges have been opened. And also, in terms of the higher education institutions, like the triple IITs or NITs or IIMs, there has been a significant increase.
The budget says that 390 new universities have been set up.
Absolutely. So there may be a large number of them may be private universities, but nevertheless, so we can broadly say that, yes, for access of education, equity of education, and the quality of education, that is something for which only budgetary provisions are not going to suffice. There is a lot more that is required than just budgetary provisions. So for that, all those who are part of the education sector, the teachers and all others who are associated with, they also have to invest a lot in looking
That's
forward.
Something which I want to come back later into our debate about policy initiatives, whether it's important to have in the union budget specifically some policy initiatives for education, especially to deregulate and liberalize it. Since the government doesn't have any money, at least they can probably introduce some good policy initiatives. We're going to come back and talk about that later. But Dr. Venita Kaul, I'd like to go to you, and I want to ask you to specifically address the NEP 2020 gives in fact, pride of place to early childhood education for the first time. recognizing its importance. But somehow, even last year and the previous year, the budgetary allocation hasn't matched this. For instance, last year, the Saksham Anganwadis got 20,550 crores. So this year, after I've looked into the budget documents, I find that it's a marginal increase, not even an increase of 700 crores. It's been pegged at 21,200 crores. I mean, is that sufficient to provide for 1.3 million Anganwadis?
Thank you for having me here in this panel, Summiya. Yeah, I think that if you think about early childhood education, I think for the first time, the national policy has really given it a lot of emphasis. And it has been really sort of recognized as the foundation for all education, and adequately sort of elaborated upon in the national curriculum framework, and a very aspirational, very ambitious plan is there. But it is not really, doesn't seem to be backed up by the financial allocations for it. Especially since you consider the situation in which the Anganwadis are. Majority of the children are expected to go to the Anganwadis, considering our economic status of the country. And the approach to provisions in the Anganwadis are very, very minimalist. One of the challenges of the Anganwadi is that, other than the usual ones of basic facilities, physical facilities are very limited. Of course, there have been some new constructions and there have been some buildings that have come up, but still a very large number don't have even the basic facilities of potable water, of toilets, of space for children. And that is something that younger children really need more than anything else: physical space and safe space. Other than that, the biggest challenge is that, it's a multi-dimensional scheme in which you have health, nutrition, education, community participation, and there is a single worker. And when you envision an early childhood education program, it is envisioned from the perspective of a dedicated nursery teacher, a teacher who is trained, a teacher who's got no other responsibilities other than looking after the educational component of the early childhood programs. And here you have an Anganwadi worker who has to do multiple jobs. Other than even ICDS, sometimes she has to do many things. So where is that potential for the Anganwadis to really perform optimally? That is something that has to be seen. So as was being said, that it is one dimension is the budget. And one of the recommendations that has been there recurrently is that there should be a dedicated or a specially assigned preschool teacher for Anganwadis. If we really want the children to get the benefit of good preschool education, which is going to give them a head start for life. But there has been no sort of even discussion on that. Initially in the drafts of the national policy, that was mentioned, but then it was subsequently dropped, possibly for reasons of finance. So I think that major issue is that, aspirationally we talk about, at least in the education budget, 10% of it should go to the early childhood stage. And I think Protiva will be in a better position to say, but it's only not more than 1% that goes for early childhood education. So somewhere this is something that is very, very disconcerting, that we jitna aap gur daloge utna hi meetha hoga kehte hain, that as much as money that you put in, as the results will be according to that. And we are not really
I'm going to come back and ask you also some questions about, the Nipun mission that's been launched and how it has also been neglected in the subsequent budgets. Dr. Tomar, if I could quickly come to you and ask you to make your introductory remarks. How is the education industry looking at this budget?
Thank you so much. Thanks, Summiya. I think a lot of the previous speakers have already spoken about how this is not adequate by any stretch of imagination. So there is a lot that has been left for us to to desire when it comes to budget announcements with respect to the education sector. That said, I think the few good things, and even if I look at last year's budget and I think about the few things that our finance minister has mentioned, the idea around setup of new universities, allowing foreign universities to come in, the fact that women's participation in STEM programs is actually one of the highest in the world, the fact that skills becoming the main currency for India as a country, for us to be able to leverage our demographic dividend that everybody talks about, right? All of that are certainly themes that the finance minister has kind of vaguely touched upon. So that the intent is there. That some of these things, even though there is not a whole lot of granularity out there, there will be, hopefully, once we are past the election and so on. I think what I just think I wished there was a bit more clarity on. One, that 6% of GDP spending, and therefore, how will NEP get implemented, right? Again, I'm sure most of us on this call will agree that there are some great elements in NEP as a document. It's a declaration of intent, and the intent is there, but then is intent enough? And we all know the answer is no, right? Just wanting something or just putting it out on a policy document is not enough, certainly not enough in a country of our size and scale, right? And therefore, what the sector is crying for is, tell us what the plan is, right? How are we going to implement NEP? So I felt I was really hoping to see something along those lines, which I still haven't. And then for sure, on infrastructure spending within education sector, I think on the K-12 side, Summiya, I think you alluded to it earlier in the call, that on the public K-12 education side, we still have a very long way to go, right? I think last time I checked the stats, there are still some 6,000 school buildings or something like that, or schools which do not even have a building. If you look at digital or computers or any form of technology penetration, there are still about 40% schools in the country that have absolutely nothing digital in them. Likewise, drinking water, likewise, toilets for girls. I mean, there is exactly
Toilets for girls. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, there is some of these things are still so basic for us to be so there's a lot that is left to be desired, I would say, on the infrastructure side and then on the implementation of NEP side.
Sure. Thanks, Avantika. We'll come back and take some of the points you've raised.
Sure.
Praveen and Protiva, you've got to give me 5 minutes. I think Dr. Kumar needs to go has another meeting. So I'm going to quickly ask him to give us 3 wish lists for the full budget that we hope will be more promising to education. I want you to please, give your closing comments and your wish list for education.
Thank you so much. And my apologies, Summiya, for I had to leave early. I think the first and foremost thing is that we would like the government to focus on implementing the national education policy. The NEP clearly is a part of an aspiration of the government, and it has also brought out the collective consciousness of not just the education community, but also the entire India's aspiration. So the 6% GDP investment in higher education is something that the government ought to definitely focus on. The second thing I would say is that I have maintained for a very long time that we need a lot more resources for education, but not all of it can come from this type of a governmental spending. I think there is a case for focusing on increasing philanthropy into education. And one of the ways by which that can be done is to look at the company law legislation that has essentially allowed the opportunities for 2% of profits of companies to be made towards CSR. Right now, the existing law does not allow CSR in contributions by the companies for them to have any form of tax benefits. I think there is a case for recognizing that contributions to education sector should be part of the CSR, and the companies and corporations should also get the benefit out of it. If you look at the United States, for example, a large part of contributions that come into education sector, especially schools, colleges, universities, is not only because of the not-for-profit element, which essentially enables these opportunities, but tax benefits that are available for people who are contributing to education. The third thing, which I think is absolutely critical, is that there is always a tendency towards favoring public universities and focusing a lot more on the public education sector. And having studied in the public university, I have all the admiration for what public universities do. But let's understand what India is today. 70% of Indian students are studying in private higher education institutions. And 70% of higher education institutions are essentially in the private sector. So if there has been a tectonic shift in the evolution of the private sector's role in higher education, it is only fair that the private sector also gets the kind of impetus and opportunities when it comes to advancing the higher education goals. And here I would say that when it comes to all aspects of funding that are made available for universities, when it comes to research grants and other such funding, and I'm not talking about funding relating to capital investment for buildings and infrastructure, that the investors, the donors, the management, they ought to provide. But on two areas, there should be a level playing field. One, access to scholarships, fellowships for students when it comes to studying in private higher education institutions. And second, access for faculty to participate in research as well as other types of research grants and other funding. Because it is only fair that the student should have the opportunity to decide where he or she wants to study, whether it is public or private, and the government should be able to fund that student. Right now, the scholarships and fellowships frameworks are heavily focused on public institutions, and in that process, significantly impedes the access to higher education opportunities that could be made available for these students. And in the same way, the level playing field is not available for faculty. There could be bright faculty members in private higher education institutions. I am not seeking any special status, but there should be a level playing field where public and private university faculty members should be able to access in a competitive manner when it comes to all forms of research grants, both within the government as well as other bodies that the government controls.
Thanks, Professor Rajkumar. I think, we need perhaps a 1991 moment in Indian education, both school and higher education. So that's something, we're going to debate while you're away. But thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here, and best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you. Praveen, I'd like to come to you now and, ask your reaction. The word school education, except for PM Shri schools, has not been mentioned at all. In even, cursorily, she could have said that education would be a, focus area. She hasn't mentioned at all, especially school education, which is, the foundation on which everything is going to be built.
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Summiya, for having me here, and best wishes and namaste to all the panelists. It's very interesting is that I'm hoping, like the other panelists, since it's an interim budget, it's probably not been given that prominence, and possibly in the final budget it will come. So I have 2-3 points here. One is that the NEP is talking about 6% spend on education. It started in 1964 by the Kothari Commission, which actually said that education needs to have 6% of GDP as its spend. Then again, there was another committee. I keep forgetting the name. It's Tapas Majumdar Committee in 98, 99 also said the same thing, and now in 2020. NEP is also saying the same thing. It's probably 60 years now that people have been talking about 6%. But that 6% versus 2.6, 2.7% is not a direct relationship in the view that is being spent on education. Worldwide, if you take the people going to private schools, it's 13% of the students go to private schools worldwide. But if you take India out of the equation, it's only 7%, right? So in the education spend that is actually happening in those budgets covers 93% of the population. For us, students are roughly about 50%, 50%, give or take 3-4% studying in private school versus a public school. So the number 6% or 2.8 to 2.9% may not be accurate in that sense, because a large percentage of the funding is actually going from the private school side. So now there are two things that we need to be done. Either the government spends more and make sure that the learning outcomes at the school level are somehow sorted out. I think we've discussed on different ways that they can improve, or enable private schools to do more. Right. At the moment, the regime is quite restrictive to private schools in many ways. So education is not even in the sunrise sector for bank financing. So if you go for loans, they don't give you on where the school is located, cannot be used as a collateral. So the funding comes, NBFCs give you, if you are not a 3-year-old trust or school, nobody gives you a loan. Then an NBFC gives you a loan but charges 18%, 24%, whatever may be the rates. So the access to capital is very, very restrictive. So one of the key areas which the government can look at is that there is a lot of patient capital around, the sovereign funds, pension funds, and things like that, who don't require this large returns, which probably some of the VCs or private equity funds look for. And we have to somehow attract this capital. So I think a regulatory environment needs to be created to be able to allow this. I'm very hopeful because the government now has shown some path in the gift city, right? How they're able to have they created a conducive environment there, and I think such an environment is actually required even for private schools. So in Telangana, I know we spend around 70,000 rupees per child per year to educate, and the learning outcomes of budget school spending only 20,000. The fees is 20,000, 25,000. The learning outcomes are not any different. It's not that one is better or the other, but it's just that we're spending that much more money. So is it worth spending that kind of money onto education? Rather enable and make things a lot easier for private schools and going forward. I really hope that the coming government does it.
We'll come back and discuss that, to liberate the entire education, K-12 to higher education sector. So like you correctly said, that, India is a land of entrepreneurs. So there are many people who want to invest in education but are hesitant because of the strangulating regulatory environment. Dr. Kundu, I want to come to you and ask you to put the numbers which I spoke about earlier in perspective. People are talking about 6% GDP spending, but we're still between the 2.7 to 3%, and this marginal improvement that's happening in education allocation, which is, I don't even think so. It's like, 2 and 3% every year we're increasing. So if you can put that in perspective for us and, tell us more about how we can see this clearer.
Thanks. Let me start in this way. If we look at this year's budget's total expenditure, it's around 47.65 lakh, and it's around 6% increase from the previous year's budget estimate. So if we look at the education budget, also and similar kind of line, like 6% increase in overall Ministry of Education's budget. Now, whenever it comes to that question of the 6% GDP and putting that in perspective, so if we convert this 1.26 lakh crore budget of Union government, it turns out to 0.37% of GDP. So our target is 6% of GDP, which is both center and states together will spend. It's not only Union government's responsibility. But if we look at the pattern, I mean, if Union government is spending around 0.4% of GDP, that means to meet that 6% of GDP, the larger resource will come from state governments. But we also know how states are suffering. I mean, the revenue mobilization is also a constraint to the states. So that's why it's very difficult if we can't increase the allocation, if Union government don't put more resources towards the education, then it would be a challenge, because we under NEP we have so many, I mean, we have visions, we have certain deadlines, I mean some timelines to meet. Even if we think about SDGs, I mean NEP 4 years of NEPs, and then we are just in the middle of SDGs goal to achieve, and then we are here. So it's a bit difficult in terms of, I mean, looking at the overall picture, it's not that hopeful. But at the same time, actually, I also want to mention one thing. We are talking about this particular budget. So whenever we look at the budget, it's not only about the budget estimate of 2024-25. It's also about what was the actual expenditure in 22-23. It's also about what is the revised estimate in 23-24. Because that also gives us an idea that how education sector was doing in the earlier 2 years. And if we look at this, the ministry's budget, actually, there was around more than 90% I mean, of the fund allocated, they have been able to spend in 22-23. And if we look at the revised estimate is much higher than both 23-24 budget estimate as well as 24-25 budget estimates. That means the government is able to spend, and there was need for more resources. Despite that, we are getting relatively lesser allocation in terms of what is being required. Another point actually I would like to highlight here, if we look at again our tax collection or tax revenue collection, it has increased, and the government has projected that it was around 50% of gross tax revenue of the total receipt in 23-24. It has increased to around 50. I mean, they have projected 55%. That means we have more revenue collection, the prospects of more revenue collection. But if we look at the budget, more than 60% of the Ministry of Education budget is actually getting financed through cess, not from gross budgetary support. I mean, we can say that we shouldn't bother that since government is financing from some sources, the money is coming, so we shouldn't bother about that. But there is some uncertainty attached with the cess, because since it is also linked with the income tax. So if which was is otherwise should be on complementary, the purpose of cess was to, if there is gross budgetary support and the whatever is lesser fund is there, cess will supplement that. But if we are more dependent on cess over time, then that's a challenge. I mean, that could be a concern. I'm not saying it would be challenge, but could be a concern. And within the school education budget, and whenever we are talking about NEP, National Education Policy, Union government is actually looking at Samagra Shiksha Abhijan as the main vehicle for implementing the NEP. And the whole Samagra Shiksha budget, I mean, 99.9% is actually getting financed through cess. And for midday meal, it's 100% is getting financed through cess. So this is one of the points. And other point, if we now disaggregate and look a bit deeper into the school education budget, actually, I would say the budget shows that it's more about, I mean, it's focusing more on exclusivity rather than universality. Why I am saying the whatever budget, the increase in the allocation of school education that we have seen, largely that is coming because there is an increase in the allocation from PM3, which is an exemplar school or model schools, or increase in allocation for Kendriya Vidyalaya. These are more of a model school of government. Now, Kendriya Vidyalaya, Navodaya, Jain Navodaya Vidyalaya or PM3. These are the schools, they cater around 20 lakh, there are around 20 lakh schools. And if we look at the larger picture, there are 15 lakh schools and 4.14 crore students, which are basically being served through the schemes like Samagra Shiksha Abhijan. So that's why you can see a more weightage towards this model school could have some effect on the more general students who are going to all these schools. So let me stop
That's
here.
quite a interesting point that you made, that the increase we're getting is actually going towards funding PM Shri schools, which is not entirely a new initiative. The existing schools such as KVs, JNVs, as Protiva mentioned, are being selected. 15,000 of them are going to be selected to be upgraded into PM Shri schools. We'll come back to that, because the Union Minister Ms. Sitaraman mentions, in fact, she commends the PM Shri school, saying that they're going to be increased over the next year, and we're going to have some more PM Shri schools. But again, the point about exclusivity is, already the KVs and JNVs are quite well funded. Do they need to be, do they need more resources to upgrade, or we need better schools? More universal coverage. Dr. Bhatt, I want to come to you now quickly and ask you about, public universities in India are actually in a crisis. Funding is being cut back, etc. Even in the union budget, etc. So how do you, especially since you're yourself at a central university, how do you see the union budget? According to you, should it liberalize higher education, including public universities? I know in Delhi universities, fees are stuck still at, I think 1990 or 1980 levels. So how do you see that? Do you see that, we need some kind of deregulation also happening in public universities, though I know it's a hot potato issue? What do you see?
Well, you see, as far as public universities are concerned, I think it is important that when we are talking that about an inclusive, platform for higher education for the youth in the country, and also that that equity also has to be taken into consideration while talking about higher education. It is important that we need to understand that there is a large section of the society where still there are people who may not be able to afford the kind of fee structure which is there in private universities. So it is important that while there should be avenues where people who can afford to go to universities which are which are charging very high fee, just like there has been a lot of talk that a lot of private schools are there now. Larger number of children are going to private schools than to government schools nowadays. Because you see, I would like to put forth the institution, for example, I want to put forth, which I am at present looking after, is actually an initiative of a central university, where on weekends the most of the premier colleges of the Delhi University, they actually turn into these centers which cater for those girls who want to go into higher education by getting direct classes, going into direct classes. This is not an ODL medium. So all the colleges on weekends, they turn into these centers where you get direct teaching for these girls, who especially for girls. So similarly, there are other initiatives also which are there. But the point is that the government is also trying to, because you said that about the exclusivity of whether it is in schools or whether it is in universities. This could also be taken, with this, that there are some of the educational institutions are being, in terms of infrastructure or in terms of training of teachers, skilling of teachers, they are being given an advantage point, so that once they are prepared, then you move forward to adding a larger number of schools or universities or colleges to it. So with that intention, there are Institute of Eminence, which the government had announced, and 1,000 crore rupees was allocated for it. And in this, the government has not just chosen public universities, it has also chosen private universities. It is rather 10 and 10, out of these. And for that, very good funding is being given for research, and also for, putting forward in terms of curriculum development and things like that. So, so one point is that while the private universities have their, they have their own, you can say, an audience in the society which they can address. Similarly, for public universities, for example, Delhi University, our fee structures, I mean, what you would be paying probably in a month for your school education in a private school, that is what is annually being charged. And still, it is one of the most premier universities in the, in the country. So public universities are important, but at the same time, I want to put forward here that more than 85% of higher education students are going to state universities, more than 85%. And the state of the state universities, which are being looked after by the states, that needs very, very special attention, because there, since in every state, the government is actually looking at higher education or at school education with a different lens. A large number of them are not interested in implementing, not a large number, but some of them are not interested in implementing NEP. And even in terms of giving the salaries to the faculty, because you see, it is, you can't just isolate one part of this whole education sector.
Yeah.
There are states who
correctly said, Dr. Bhatt, state
still not
universities need like reform.
even the 7th pay commission has not been implemented by certain states. So how do you, what kind of an incentive it is there for the faculty, for the teachers? So this is, I mean, like under this whole umbrella of the education sector, it is important that the states also actually have to play a very pivotal role when it comes to implementation and allocation of budget, both.
Yeah. I'm going to, have a quick rapid round now and ask each one of you all to give, your 3 wish lists. So, Dr. Bhatt, I'll start with you only, and then I'll ask everyone in your sector what you'd like, higher education especially.
I would look forward to that how NRF is going to unfold, because that is still something National, Research Foundation. Government has, we all have very high hopes from it. Almost 50,000 crore has been promised to it, and the policy document of NEP, it has a special emphasis that a large number of funding will be given to state universities, to kind of bring them, in every respect at the same level as the central universities. So that is something which I look forward to. And second is that in terms of, I also look forward that in terms of health education, because a large number of youth today in India are facing various mental health challenges. So if the government could, in the coming times, could put some emphasis on the mental health issues among the youth through colleges and universities.
Okay, great, thanks. Dr. Kaul, coming to you and asking you to give your wish list for early childhood education in the full budget.
Yeah.
We hope the minister is listening.
Absolutely. Ministers are listening because childhood education spans across women and child development and Ministry of Education. So I think both ministers need to listen. Certainly, I think that, as I was saying earlier, that, with the kind of emphasis that has been placed, and very rightly so, on the foundational stage, I'm not even talking just about early childhood education, but even the classes 1 and 2, which come into the school sector. I think that it is absolutely imperative that the money should go where the commitment is. Because it is something that is going to, I mean, there are enough studies around the world which have shown that, there is a lot of, the returns are extremely significant to investment in early childhood years. But that sort of seriousness is needed to be able to give adequate allocations for early childhood education. I think allocation specifically is needed for teachers, because the teacher is extremely important in the early years, and the professionalization of this early childhood education teaching has to be brought in, because we cannot just continue with just having just any woman being a teacher. That kind of an attitude who can be also, this whole feminization of early childhood teaching force has also in a way exploited teachers, because they have not been paid adequately. The Anganwadi workers paid hardly anything. And even in private schools, some of those unrecognized ones, you see a lot of women working who are hardly getting any salaries. So I think we should give due allocations for teachers, for teaching. And for that, what we need to really have is the cadre of teachers for the foundational stage, who really have, it's a very specialized kind of a pedagogy that has to be transacted with children, for which special training is required. It is not more of the same thing, and for which I think it is important that the government takes it very seriously if it wants to get the results that it has aspired for in the policy. So I think that is most important. And of course,
I think that's a very important suggestion, investment in well-trained early childhood education teachers.
The teaching force is absolutely a must, yes.
Dr. Tomar, coming to you, asking you for your wish list.
Yes, of course. I think my first one would be skills and apprenticeships. So, going back to higher education and lifelong learning and so on. I think for me, it's going to be very critical to see, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, that there is something with respect to skilling, upskilling, reskilling through real world internships or apprenticeships. So that's one. Second, I would say digital infrastructure. So, a lot of the things that Dr. Bhatt was talking about, I just feel I don't think we are going to be able to solve the country's higher education, both quantity and quality problems without technology. I just don't think it's possible, right? Because we are sitting at 28% GER today with an aspiration to get to 50% GER by 2035. I right now don't know if that can be done without technology. So I think that has to be a significant, sizable thought that goes into digitization of higher education. And then how do you do that? And the third one, I would actually extend Dr. Kaul's point around high quality teachers. And I would say, why just early childcare? We actually need that across the education ecosystem, across the spectrum. I 100% agree with her when she says, no one should just wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a teacher, right? Teaching today is plan B, plan C for a lot of people, right? If you look at a lot of our both public and private school teachers, they're doing it because they originally wanted to do something else which didn't pan out. Then they thought, oh, okay, why not? It's a relatively more comfortable, easier job to do. Let me become a teacher. I just don't think that is right. So I think my third one would be investment into teacher training, teacher development, but also making sure that teaching as a profession is everybody's first choice, not plan B, C, D, E, right? So those are my three.
Thanks, Avantika. Praveen, to you. Of course, I know your first
Sure.
one is liberally.
First, yeah, I would echo Dr. Tomar's recommendation on teacher training, right? So teacher training is very important. I would also like to say that the teachers have to come into teaching profession. Obviously, the salaries also have to grow up. So the growth of salaries is a natural progression, and I think governments or public should not view it as increasing fees is becoming a challenge, and fee regulation should be very meaningful, or should be more of a reasonable one. Let me put it this way, so that the fees increases, also salary should also commensurately increase. Only then we'll get the best and brightest into the teaching field. That's one. The second one is that yeah, I mean, I think the time has come. We should bell the cat. We should liberate school education and allow investments for profit schools. So already UP and Haryana do allow for profit schools. But then you go to CBSE, and then CBSE says that it has to be only a school in a trust or a society. So there's a lot of disparity there. So somewhere we have to liberate this sector. And the third one is like how I mentioned earlier, it's about priority sector lending as well. So to set up schools, the cost to set up a school has to come down. And just to give you an example, recently, I think Gurugram announced auctions for lands. Their base price was 12 to 14 crores. So if you're talking about buying land at that price for a school and setting up a school, just imagine what the fee should be. So the government should look at providing subsidized pieces of land and promote with better interest rates for the schools, so that it will encourage people to set up schools.
Thanks, Praveen. Protiva, to you now.
Thanks. I think I will echo everyone. My first, ask would be to invest on staff, not only teachers, but also non-teaching staff. And also and at every level of starting from pre-primary to higher education, there is dearth of teachers, subject teachers, especially at the secondary school level, and also the other non-teaching staff. And autonomous institutions like NCERT, CBSE, there are also so much vacancy, but they have so much role that has been highlighted in NEP. So there is need for recruitment. That is my first ask. And the second would be is, now time has come to focus more on secondary education. We talk so much about the low female workforce participation rate. It's one of the lowest. But then secondary education is the bridge between higher education and work, and adolescent girls are so much dependent on public provisioning. So time has come to focus more on the secondary education. And the third is looking at from the equity perspective, there is a need for relooking at the scholarships and more higher educational university, especially the university for general education. I'm not talking about science, but social science, and that human resource. The general education should be promoted at the university level, because more resources is going towards science and technology, and that is required. But at the same time, resource would be required at that front, because many of these universities are catering large number of students. So yeah, these are the three asks.
Thank you, Prativa. Thank you to all my panelists. I think we've had a very well-informed debate on education, ranging from early childhood to higher education. And I think we all are in agreement that, we hope that the full budget that's going to be presented, and the indications are that, BJP government will come back to power. And we hope that the spectacular announcements, which our union minister said would not be in the interim budget, would be in the full budget. And we hope all these spectacular announcements are for education, and that in its third term, the Modi government will invest wholeheartedly in education, because without investment in human capital development, you cannot have even a 5 or 10 trillion economy. It's not possible to sustain a growing economy, which is growing at 7%. The Finance Ministry says that this year we may hit 7% and the other economies are going at 2%. So we have more money, we have more taxes, and all this needs to go. A substantial part of it needs to go in education and in education world in several years now. For almost 10-15 years, we've been saying that there is money, you can find it if you have the political will to invest in education. It's time after 60 years that we move from the 3%, 2.73% of GDP to achieving 6% national spending on GDP on education, especially if we are to realize the transformative reforms which Nirmala Sitharaman talks about NEP doing over the next 5 years. Thank you all, and hopefully we'll take all your recommendations. We'll send them to the minister. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bhatt, Dr. Kaul, Avantika, Praveen, and Protiva.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone.
World.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.